Good morning again, everybody. I don't know if you can remember back a week ago, but last week was Easter. Does it seem like a week, or it seems like more than a week? I don't know. It's probably because of the candy coma I've been in from all the candy that was in all those Easter eggs. The best part of being a parent is the free candy that comes from everybody else. But it's been a week, so it's Easter is one of those things that, right? We know it, we remember it, we spend some time celebrating it on Easter, but the story of Easter and what Easter means to us doesn't stop there, right? We went through all the pieces of it, right? We know that what happened to Jesus being betrayed, we saw what happened to how he was treated, we saw he was turned over, how the false trial, all that stuff, all that we know now it's all over. We also know that the whole initial discovery of finding the empty tomb, that's all over. So everything for the people that were around in Jesus' time is different. They've experienced it all, they went through it all, and things are just not how they were before. It's all over. So the question comes, what's next? What's next? Right? And for the disciples in that time, it had to be kind of that crazy in-between moment, right? They didn't really understand what was going on. They had made this change and witnessed it, but what comes next, right? Now, they knew what Jesus had talked about. I don't know that they fully grasped it, but from where we are now today in history, we can look back and see that what Jesus set out to do, he had done, right? He had completed it. He said it's finished, and he meant it. He came to redeem and save the earth, and he did that, right? And we celebrate that, and that's why Easter is important to us, and we celebrate that, and we remember that, and we live that. But we've also got that question, right? What's next? Easter is, it's a ways away. We'll be back there again in 12 months or so, right? But in between then and now, what is it that happens, right? What is it that we do? And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today, right? Because we see some stories here of people believing and hearing and knowing, and we've got to see what happens next. Now, all the Gospels kind of talk about what happens next, but John talks about it the most. That's where we're going to go this morning, to John, into chapter 20. If you got your Bibles, go ahead and turn there. So we see some more examples of what happened after the Easter story, as we've talked about it, takes place. So we see that some see Jesus and some interact with Jesus, and we get to this point in John chapter 20, verse 24, where we talk about a man named Thomas. Now, we all know the story of doubting Thomas, right? And that's what we're going to look at today. So we're going to start at verse number 24. I'm going to read all the way through the end of John chapter 20 there about the story, as my Bible titles it here, Seeing and Believing. Now Thomas, called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. Talking about the verses up there a little before, as Jesus commissions them. The other disciples therefore said to him, "We have seen the Lord." So he said to them, "Unless I see his hands, the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." And after 8 days, the disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, "Peace to you." Then he said to Thomas, "Reach your finger here, and look at my hands, and reach your hand here, and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing." And Thomas answered him and said, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. So we see what happens here, right? We see through John, and if we kind of go back in there a little bit, Jesus has interactions with people after he is resurrected. You continue on in the next chapter in John, we see more of that. So Jesus is talking with his disciples. He's done that, and a couple times it seems like he's kind of brought everybody together and summoned them there to talk to them and speak to them and encourage them. I think that Jesus understood, right, that he had done what he came to do. I think that he knew what was finished, that his mission to redeem the people was done. But I also see something here about Jesus that makes me think that he probably just wasn't ready to go and sit at the Father's right hand until everybody had the chance to hear who he was, that he had risen, that he was alive. Right? I want to say here that it's Jesus' preference that everybody be saved. I think that's what Jesus wants. That's Jesus' desire. And he's dying on the cross, and as he's bleeding and breathing his last for us, I think he's thinking about all of that. I think that's what he wants everybody to do. I think that's his preference, right? I think Jesus had that in mind as he lived and died for us. I'm not saying that everybody is saved, but I'm saying that that's what Jesus would want. And he loves all of us. He loves everybody. He loves our neighbors, and he loves those ones who sin against us, and he loves those people that we can't just get along with. Jesus loves all of them. But what he offers to us is a choice to receive him or not. His intent was that everybody would, right? But that's not the way it always worked. And I think that's why he's spending a little time here with his apostles. He wants to tell them again, I want you to make sure that you know I'm here. And then he meets with everybody but Thomas, right? And they talk and they know and they see him and they believe, but Thomas wasn't there. So what's Jesus do? Well, he sticks around a little bit more. A little bit later, he goes and he meets, and then Thomas is there and gets the chance to hear. This is the effort that Jesus puts into the world knowing about him. Jesus wants people to know about him. The Bible says Jesus isn't coming back until everybody hears, right? He means that. He wants everybody to hear his message. The really cool thing is that Jesus has chosen you and I to be the carriers of that message. He wants us to impact people. He cares so much about mankind and all of his creation that he wants us all to know this story, right? And he's called us to be the ones that deliver it. And he's going to do whatever he can to get that message, right? He wants all mankind to be with him in glory forever. That's important, I think, because I think that kind of shapes the attitude that we can have toward Jesus. Something else that I want to point out that we see here with Thomas is he wasn't there for the first time when everybody met with him, right? Or Jesus met with everybody. And we see that Thomas almost missed out. Like he risked missing being touched by Jesus. He risked missing interacting with Jesus. And I don't know where he was or what he was up to, but we do know that he wasn't with all of the other followers, right? I think there's a blessing in being with other believers. Not that it's a required piece of salvation, and not that meeting with other believers gets us to salvation, but I do think there is importance in meeting with people. Thomas, because he wasn't meeting with his band of believers here, almost missed what God had for him. I think church is very important, right? I think that what we do here means something. I get stuff out of being with other believers, right? When you surround yourself with people that are of the like mind, it's better for you, right? It's better to be with people that have that same goal in mind. If we all have the same attitude of praising God and worshiping God, and we come together to do that once in a while, that's a good thing, right? It's a good thing. It's like, right, if you're trying to lose weight or get in shape, you find yourself hanging out with people that work out or walk or go to the gym or eat right. That's more encouraging than being with the people who don't, right? It's just helpful that way. I think being in church is the same way. I think this example from Thomas also points to that. When you're with people that experience Jesus and live for Jesus and know Jesus, it helps, right? So we can say that the church is an important piece. It's not the only piece, but I do think it plays a big role in our walk with God. I think it does. Now, let's get into what Thomas has to say here, right? So we see how all this went down. Thomas missed this first meeting with Jesus, and Thomas was here, and he's back with him, right? He hasn't abandoned them. He's there, but we see that when they come back to Thomas and they say, we met Jesus and we saw him, and here's what happened. And then Thomas's reaction is one that's a little bit strange, right? So what's he say? Look at verse 25. Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. Now, I kind of get where Thomas is coming from, right? We give Thomas this bad rap, and we call him Doubting Thomas, right? Because the guy didn't believe when everybody else told him. But can you put yourself in his position for a while, right? So what Thomas is saying is, okay, I kind of see what you're saying, but until I see it myself, I'm not there to believe it yet. I'm not as passionate about it as you. I'm not as certain about it as you. I'm believing you, but I don't want to believe in what Jesus is saying here, what Jesus has accomplished here, until I can see it myself. It's almost like he's saying, it's not that I doubt you, but I want to have that same interaction that you had. Right? If you're asking me to change my life and my mindset and do something totally different here in this world than what we've done, I think I need to see that as well. Because wasn't I there the whole time too? I was there through Jesus' ministry, and I saw what he taught, and I saw the betrayal, and I saw him on the cross. I saw all of that. So if you're expecting me, as Thomas I think is saying here, if you're expecting me to be as excited about this as you are, if you're expecting me to put my life on the line like you are asking me to do, I think I need to see it myself, right? I don't want to have to talk to somebody about Jesus and say, I know Jesus is real because Peter told me he was real. I don't want to talk about Jesus to somebody and say, I know Jesus can raise up from the dead because John told me that he saw Jesus raised from the dead, right? Now, not that that's not a solid testimony, but isn't it a better testimony if we can talk to that from experience? Here's my point here. We all have to have our own story, right? If Jesus' intent is for the whole world to hear who he is, and he's called us to do that, it's one thing, isn't it, to be able to quote the Gospel of John and say, John said this. And nothing wrong with that, right? But I think it makes a whole lot different impact if we can say, we've experienced Jesus in this way. And I think that's why Jesus interacts with us all in separate ways, right? It's like going to the right person for advice at the right time, right? Like I go to my dad for advice on all kinds of things because that's what guys do, right? That's what we do. So we ask dad's questions. What I don't ask my dad questions on is like how to get a stain out of a shirt, right? Like he may have an opinion, but he's probably not the expert in that, right? I'm not going to go to him and ask him the best way to cook vegetables. Like not my dad's strong suit, right? We have those people we can go to and ask questions, and we can take their opinion, and we do so when it's something that we think they're an expert in, right? Like I can ask Jonah what the best flavor of Pop-Tart is, and I will believe his statement. But I'm not going to go to Jonah and say, Jonah, what's the quickest way to get from here to downtown Chicago, right? Now, I know that if I ask Jonah that question, he will give me an answer, right? He will tell me what the best way to go is. And I can choose to follow his advice, but it doesn't mean as much coming from an 8-year-old as it does coming from somebody who's actually been to Chicago, right? I think that's how our Christian life is too, right? Like we can have an opinion on the things of God, and we can have a take on how God says he's the father to the fatherless and the mother to the motherless. He says that, right? And I know he says that, and I can stand up here and tell you how that's true, but what I can't do is tell you what that means because I didn't experience that, right? I was blessed. Had a father and a mother, both godly people that followed God and taught me in the things of God, and that was fantastic. I can't tell you what it's like to be without that. So if you want that experience, you need to find somebody who lived a life with that experience and found God in that experience, right? That's how God works. He talks to people and touches people and moves people in individual ways, and he gives every one of us a story, our own story. And a lot of the ways, we're just like Thomas in that, right? Thomas is saying, I just want to use my experiences to tell my story of what Jesus is to me. That's what Jesus calls you to do today. Because there are people in here that have had great experiences with God that somebody next to you hasn't experienced, that somebody next to you doesn't know. They've had that salvation and that moment where Jesus has lifted them up and saved them and provided for them and helped them, and they know that. And when they talk about it, it's them not talking from somebody else's secondhand story, but it's them talking about what it is that they've experienced. You are those stories, right? And you may not think yours is exciting. You may not think yours is that great, but God has touched you in a way that somebody around you needs to hear about, in a way that only you can tell about. in a way that only you can explain. Right? Thomas here isn't doubting Jesus. He's not doubting the power that he has. He's not doubting that Jesus wasn't there. I think that maybe he's just doubting those people telling the story. Right? You ever heard a story from somebody who just not really the most trustworthy person? Right? Right? We try to explain this to the kids all the time, right? When they lie about something. So one of these times you're going to tell me that, and I'm not going to believe that anymore. Right? I can't believe you when you say he took your rock, because the other day it wasn't your rock. Right? It's those kind of things that kind of lead people to not really want to believe people. But if it's your story, and they can see a changed life in you, then maybe they'll look past all those flaws, right? I mean, think of who Thomas was with here. He's not with like a bunch of upstanding citizens. A few years ago, these guys weren't all that great, right? A few years ago, these guys had problems. And even as they're being ministered to by Jesus, their idea of what he is and who he is and how he serves and what he's capable of is questionable at times. Right? I mean, just a couple days ago, Peter had denied that he even knew Jesus like 3 times because things got a little dicey. And now here's Peter telling Thomas, no, you've got to believe me. Jesus was really there. And Thomas is saying, okay, like I believe that, but I want my own story. I want my own witness. I want my own testimony. Jesus wants us to have our own testimony, right? He wants us to base what we speak on our own experiences, what we know ourselves. Right? Now, I think Jesus leads us and he teaches us, and our ideas grow and our path changes. And I think in all of that, Jesus continues to work. But what I think Jesus wants us to do today is to talk about who Jesus is to us that we know. Right? We know. I think that's what Thomas wanted. I don't know that it's doubting Thomas as much as I think sometimes it was jealous Thomas. Right? Like he was, guys, I was with you the whole time. How in the world did Jesus come the one time that I wasn't there? How come Jesus came then? I want to experience that too. Because I want to give my life to this, but I want to also have my own story, not the story of Peter and of John. I want a Thomas story. He wanted something to base it on. So that's what he was yearning for, and guess what Jesus provided? And you want something to testify about? You want something to be able to bring to the world? I think Jesus will bring that to you. I think Jesus gives you that opportunity, and here we see just that, right? So everybody's gathered together. They're all in this room, and everybody's there, and I don't know what they're talking about or praying about. I can imagine that they're worried or scared or questioning, and they're asking that question, what's next? This happened. We've seen it. What's next? What do we do? Now, John writes in a very specific way here what happens. Look at verse 26. Something he writes there is intriguing, right? It says that Jesus came in, but he also says the doors were shut. So he's very, very precise here. The doors were shut. If you look at the last interaction that Jesus has with the disciples there in the book of John, you see the same thing in verse 19. The doors were shut. So everything is shut. And that Jesus appears. Another pretty cool point here is that we can shut things down, but Jesus still gets in, right? We can close ourselves in. We can shut the doors and the windows, and yet things still happen, right? Jesus can still get in, but Jesus isn't the only thing that gets in to somebody who's shut down, right? Sickness, misery, cold, death, heartbreak, those things can still come in, even if we lock ourselves in a room, right? And if those things can come in, I have no doubt that Jesus can also come in, right? Jesus can be there. We find ourselves in life, I think, at times where we think we are locked down, like we're shut down. We've put ourselves to this one room by ourselves and locked away from all of these feelings of the world. But yet, even in that, we still feel that hurt. I guess my challenge here is to not just let the hurt come in, but invite Jesus into that place as well. He can come in through things and through situations and through times that seem like there's no room for Jesus or a place that he wouldn't be. I think he can come into those times in our lives and he can make a difference. Thomas needed him in this time when he was wondering what was going on and he was feeling like he was maybe lost and abandoned, and he was wondering why Jesus appears to all of these guys but not to him, even though he had done all of this for Jesus. His mind was in this place where he could very easily shut out the things of God, but Jesus can come into those times anyway. If you find yourself in one of those times, don't be afraid to look for Jesus in that time too. It may be the worst situation in a really bad time, but Jesus can get in there. And he did here with Thomas. Thomas needed him, and here Jesus shows up. He says, Thomas, I'm here for you. You needed a Jesus story. You needed to see me to testify. And here I am. Here I am, Thomas. I'm here for you. Look at my hands and look at my side and put your fingers here as you said you had to do. But you notice what Thomas does here, right? As Jesus says, reach here and touch these wounds. Put your hand here. You said you needed to see and touch to believe. Here I am. But notice that Thomas never does that, does he? Thomas never does what he said he had to do to be able to believe. Thomas never does what he said had to happen in order for him to believe the testimony of the disciples. He doesn't do that. He doesn't put his finger into the nail. He doesn't put his hand into the side. He just looks at Jesus. And in verse 28, he says, my Lord and my God. Thomas has this life-changing experience with one glimpse of Jesus Christ. With one look of who Jesus really is, Thomas's life changes. That's how Jesus works. Right? People think they've got to have stacks of evidence, but what is really real to people about Jesus is the life change that he can have in that one moment. What's Thomas say here? He says, my Lord and my God. Thomas's life changes. His testimony changes, and his story becomes this, that Jesus is his Lord and his God. Two different parts. Lord, meaning that Jesus has dominion over his life on earth, meaning that Thomas can trust him and follow him and believe in him and stand for him and depend on him, meaning that Jesus has control of the things in his life. Also means that he does it for Jesus, not for the other disciples, right? Not because other people were good around him, but because of what he believed. Our belief in Jesus and our trust in him and our faith in him and our ability to stand beside him has to come from what we know, not from what somebody else has told us. Right? I can stand up here and I can say over and over again how good God is. And I can tell you what he's done for me. And I can show you in a lot of different ways how he's touched my life. But until you know that, your life doesn't change. That's how Jesus works. Right? You're not going to follow Jesus because I do. You're going to follow Jesus because you do. Now apply that to your life. The ones around you aren't going to follow Jesus just because you do. Right? They're not going to believe in Jesus just because you do. And no matter what you do or what you say or how much you encourage them, they're not going to come to that until they make that choice. Right? So we can pile our cars full of people and we can bring everybody we can to church, but we can't make them believe, right? What's the saying? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? That's church. We can fill buses of people up and we can bring them here. We can bring all the ones that we love. We can snatch them up the night before, make them all camp out at our house and bring them all to church on Sunday morning. We can do that. That's not what Jesus says, right? Why? Because it won't do any good. Okay? It just won't. There's that time that comes in everybody's life, right? Where if you're like me, you went to church, right? We went to church on Sunday morning. I didn't have a choice for the first 18 years of my life, right? Because that's how it worked. Right? You got up, you got dressed, you went to church. That's how it happened. That was Sunday, right? But after I moved out of the house, I still kept coming to church, right? That's not because my family's making me do this, right? We've made a choice. Nobody's making you be here today. You've made a choice. Why? Well, because you believe there's something there. Right? So no matter how much we can force people, it's got to be on their own intuition that they make it to serve God. Right? It just has to be on their own. They've got to choose Christ as their Lord. Right? We know why. We know how. We know that it works, and we can talk about it, and we can explain it, and we should be doing that. But we can't feel bad if they don't make that choice. That's not up to us. It's up to them. Right? So here's Thomas and a bunch of people who have seen Jesus. Now he's experiencing Jesus himself, and he says, okay, I get it now. I get it. I can trust you with my life because I've seen what you can do. I've seen what you're capable of. You've changed the lives of these people, and you're changing my life as well. That's how we interact with God and with other people. Right? But he doesn't just say my Lord, does he? He says also my God. He says to Jesus, my Lord and my God. So Thomas gets it. That yes, Jesus is Lord of the right now. Jesus can be somebody we can trust in, we can rely on, we can believe in. We know Jesus is with us. We know he's got a story for us. We know he's going to do some really cool things through us, and we can talk about that, but it doesn't just stop here. This is God through all eternity, right? Supreme power, supreme authority, dominion over all things, right? So Thomas is saying, you are not just my Lord here in this life, but you are God forever. God not bound by space, not bound by time, not bound by the physical limits, that he is God for always. And Thomas's life has changed here, not just for his time here on earth, but for his time in all of eternity, right? We can be absolutely thankful for what God does for us here on earth, but we haven't even seen a glimpse of what he can do for us for all of eternity. We haven't even began to experience what God is going to do for us in the eternity here to come. We can be happy and excited and praise God for the blessings he gives to us and the ones around us today, but that's just the very beginning. Right? Because everything we have here on earth will fail away. Our health, our bodies, our material possessions, that will all go away, right? Our names, our legacy, what it is we leave behind, all that's going to be forgot about. But it's not going to be forgot about in eternity, because we're going to be worshiping God with all the saints for all eternity. That's who our God is. He promises something bigger than just peace and guidance here on earth. He promises a life with him forever. And Thomas knew that right there after experiencing God with just one look. Just one glimpse of Jesus. He didn't have to stick his hand in his finger in his hand or his hand in his side. He didn't have to see all of that. He just had to look upon Jesus. One change made Thomas change his life. One look at Jesus can make a huge difference for us. And I think it can make a big difference for the world around us too. Here's the importance of that, right? Is maybe that's all it takes, is that one glimpse of Jesus in somebody's life to make them turn their life around or clean up their life or to love in a different way. Maybe it's a way that makes them become more honest and become less gossipy. Maybe just one glimpse of Jesus is all it takes to turn somebody from their wicked ways onto the path that Jesus has. And maybe, just maybe, you're the way that Jesus chooses to bring that one glimpse. Maybe you, and the way you live your life, and the one time experiencing one moment of grace and love and peace that you've got in your life with somebody else out there, maybe that's the one glimpse that they need to turn their life around. Maybe that's all it takes, right? Maybe we're that vessel that Jesus is choosing to use. And it's not up to us to change lives, not up to us to make the decision for them. It's up to us to live a life that shows the world who Jesus is. That's what we could do. That's what we're called to do. And the people around us, whether you know it or not, are watching, and maybe that's what it takes for them to see Jesus and make a difference. That's where the blessing's at, right? And that's what Jesus says. Look at what Jesus says to Thomas in verse 29. He says, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Right? We know that, right? But what's he say here? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. We're not all going to be there to see Jesus physically standing in front of us. We're not there, right? But what Jesus has for us is a plan for all of us to know him, even if we weren't there in that that room that day, even if we weren't there at the cross, even if we didn't see the empty tomb, right? Even if we didn't get to experience this time where Thomas did, right? We weren't there to put our finger in his hand and our hand in his side. We couldn't see the wounds. What's Jesus say? Blessed are those who haven't seen him and believe. Jesus wants to bless all of us, even if we weren't there. His blessing is that big. It's that overarching, and it's that permanent, that it can make a difference in the lives of everybody on this earth. Because what Jesus came to accomplish was to bring his message to everybody. That's what he wanted to do. Jesus did not choose to show up in rooms everywhere and physically show everybody that he's still alive. He didn't choose to do it that way. Why? I don't know. I don't figure that stuff out. But what I do know is that he chose us to be that way that people can hear about Jesus. They can learn about Jesus. They can see Jesus. And we see here that Jesus says those are the people that are blessed. I guess my challenge to you this week after Easter and going forward, right? What's next? What's next for us after we know the tomb is empty, after we know that Jesus rose from the dead? Where do we go from here? I think we go the same place the disciples went. I think we go to bless people. I think that's what God's called us to do. To be out there, to be the voice of Jesus, to be there to show the world what Jesus can do, that he can change lives. To be there to love people as he did, to be there to bless people as he did, to be there to show people that there is something better than this life. That's what he's calling us to do. I think that's what's next for us, right? We believe the tomb was empty. We believe Jesus defeated death. We believe our sins are washed away. So what do we do with that? We let everybody around us know. And we do it in a way that only we can do in the situation and in the life that we are. He's called all of us to the life that we're in right now. He's called all of us to make a difference in the life we're at now. Let's go out and be a blessing. Let's go out and carry on the work that Jesus finished. Right? It's all done. His intention is for everybody to hear the word of God. Make sure you're playing your part in that goal. Right? Make sure you're the one that's showing the world who Jesus is. That you're showing your world who Jesus is, the people right around you. I'm not saying knock them out, hit them over the head with a Bible, put them in the back of your car, and bring them to church next Sunday. I'm not saying that, because we know that's not going to work, right? But what they can know is that you are different than you may have been before, or you're handling a situation in a way that the world would have handled differently, or you've experienced Jesus in this thing that they're now going through, and they want to know how it is they can find God in that moment. Only you've got your story. Only you have experienced God the way that you have. But now he's calling us to do what's next, which is tell the world about it. Easter is a great time, and we should continue to celebrate it. And I think it deserves that time where we celebrate Easter as standalone, but I don't think our celebration stops there. I think it continues on with how we go on to live our lives. So let's do that, right? Let's do that. Anybody have anything this morning? All right. Let's sing one more song.